Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something pretty fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating and important.
Definitely. We're looking at the World Bank Group's big plan to tackle climate change. It's called the World Bank Group Climate Change Action Plan, and it covers 2021 to 2025.
A 5-year plan.
Exactly. But here's the thing that's got my eye. It's not just about greening individual projects anymore. This plan is all about greening entire economies.
That's a huge shift and a necessary one. We can't just keep adding little green sprinkles here and there.
Right, like putting a solar panel on a roof and calling it a day.
Exactly. We need systemic change, and that's what this action plan is trying to get at.
Okay, I'm all for ambitious goals, but I have to ask. The plan mentions developing countries need like $4 trillion per year for sustainable infrastructure. I mean,
It's a mind-boggling number, right?
totally. Is that even realistic?
It's a massive challenge, no doubt about it. But what I find impressive is that the World Bank Group isn't shying away from that. They've laid out a really comprehensive strategy.
Leighton, I mean, what's the strategy?
Well, they recognize that to succeed, you have to align climate action with development goals. You can't treat them as separate issues.
Right, because for a lot of countries, especially developing countries, those immediate development needs often overshadow long-term climate concerns.
Exactly. And the plan really stresses finding solutions that benefit both.
So it's a win-win. Good for development, good for the climate.
Precisely. One of the interesting ways they're doing this is through these new country climate and development reports, or CCDRs for short.
CCDR, so like a personalized climate action plan for each country.
You got it. They're doing a deep dive into each country's situation, analyzing the risks, the opportunities, and charting a path forward that's tailored to their needs.
It's like a custom-fit suit instead of a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. They're aiming to release 25 of these reports in the first year alone.
Wow. So they're not wasting any time. That's a strong start.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it shows a real commitment to this idea of aligning climate and development goals.
Okay, so they've got these personalized plans, but what else are they doing to make sure everything aligns with, the big global climate goals, like the Paris Agreement, for example?
Well, they've made a big commitment, aligning all new World Bank projects with the Paris Agreement starting in July 2023.
So no more funding projects that work against climate goals? That's a bold move.
It is. It sends a clear signal that they're serious about this. And to back that up, they're putting their money where their mouth is.
How so?
The plan sets a target. 35% of all World Bank Group financing will go towards climate action.
35%, that's up from...
26% in recent years, which was already a record high.
Wow, okay. That's a serious chunk of change. So they've got the plan, they've got the money. Now, where exactly are they focusing all this effort?
They've identified 5 key systems that need a major overhaul if we're going to tackle climate change.
Hit me with those 5.
Energy, agriculture, and food systems, cities, transportation, and manufacturing.
The big ones.
Yeah.
The heavy hitters when it comes to emissions.
Exactly. These are the systems that need the most attention if we're going to make real progress.
Okay, let's dive into those one by one. First up, energy. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to ditch fossil fuels and go all in on renewables.
It's the obvious first step. But there's more to it than just flipping a switch.
Okay, how so?
The plan emphasizes a global shift to low-carbon energy sources, yes. But they also highlight something really important.
What's that?
Making sure those energy systems are resilient.
Resilient to climate change impacts.
Exactly. Things like extreme weather events, rising sea levels, you name it.
Right. Building a clean energy system is one thing, but if it can't withstand those increasing climate shocks, it's not going to be very helpful.
Exactly. And the plan recognizes that each country has its own unique energy needs and challenges.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not. For some countries, it might mean rapidly phasing out coal. For others, it might mean expanding access to any electricity at all, but making sure it's done in a climate-smart way.
So meeting those urgent development needs while laying the groundwork for a low-carbon future.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance for each context.
Okay, that makes sense. What about agriculture and food systems? This one always feels like a tangled web to me.
Oh, it definitely is, because this sector is both a major contributor to climate change and a victim of it.
So it's kind of stuck in a vicious cycle.
Right. Think about it. Changing rainfall patterns, extreme temperatures, new pests and diseases, all of that directly impacts food production.
And hurts the livelihoods of millions, especially in developing countries.
Exactly. So the question becomes, how do we break that cycle? How do we create a food system that's both productive and resilient?
All right, spill the beans. What's the plan's recipe for a climate-friendly food system?
They're focusing on something called climate-smart agriculture. It's all about increasing productivity, reducing emissions, and building resilience all at the same time.
So it's a triple win. I like the sound of that. And I know the plan also talks about tackling food waste.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge area of opportunity.
It's crazy to think that a third of all food produced globally ends up wasted.
A third. Shocking, right? Addressing that alone could significantly reduce emissions. A&D, help feed more people.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most impactful solutions aren't about some fancy new technology.
Sometimes it's about fixing the systems we already have, making them more efficient and less wasteful.
Totally. Okay, let's move on to cities. They're on the front lines of a lot of climate impacts, right?
Oh, absolutely. Cities consume most of the world's energy, and they're often located in areas that are highly vulnerable to things like heat waves, flooding, and sea level rise.
So how does this action plan address the unique challenges and opportunities of cities?
They're focusing on supporting cities to decarbonize, promoting green buildings and transportation, and building resilience to those climate risks we talked about.
So making cities more livable, healthier, and less dependent on cars.
Exactly. Think more parks, better public transit, and buildings designed to withstand extreme weather.
And what about all the waste that cities generate?
The plan addresses that too. There's a big emphasis on integrated waste management and what they call circular economy approaches, moving away from that take, make, dispose model.
Towards a system that's more sustainable and resource efficient.
Right. Less waste, more recycling, and maybe even turning that waste into valuable resources.
Like energy or fertilizer? Now we're talking. Okay, let's tackle transportation. This one feels like a tough nut to crack.
It is. We're so reliant on cars and planes globally.
So what's the plan? Everyone just switches to electric vehicles.
That's part of it, for sure. But sustainable transport is about more than just EVs.
What else is there?
It's about giving people better choices, especially in cities, making it easier and safer to walk, bike, or take public transit.
So it's not about taking away cars altogether.
Not necessarily. It's about making those sustainable options more attractive and accessible.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, last but not least, let's talk about manufacturing. This one maybe isn't as obvious as some of the others.
It might not be, but it's incredibly important. Manufacturing, especially heavy industry, is a major emitter.
Yeah, I guess I don't often think about how much energy goes into making things like cement and steel.
And those processes are often very carbon intensive, so how do you green something like that?
Exactly. You can't just swap out coal for solar panels in a steel mill.
It's a challenge, that's for sure. The plan calls for a multi-pronged approach, promoting resource efficiency, low-carbon technologies, and, you guessed it, circular economy approaches.
So reducing waste at every stage of the process, from the raw materials to the final product.
Exactly. And there's a big emphasis on helping developing countries industrialize in a cleaner, more sustainable way than we did in the past.
Learning from our mistakes and leapfrogging to a better model. I like that.
It's about supporting those countries to achieve their development goals without repeating the same polluting patterns we saw in the past.
Okay, this all sounds amazing in theory, but I think everyone's wondering the same thing right now. How are we going to pay for all of this? We're talking trillions of dollars.
You're right. That's the trillion-dollar question. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into next.
All right, everyone, stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone. Last time we were talking trillions.
Trillions, yes.
The World Bank Group is aiming to mobilize trillions of dollars to finance this massive shift to green economies.
It's an incredibly ambitious goal.
To say the least. So how are they planning to do it? They can't possibly do it alone, right?
You're right. Even the World Bank Group's resources are limited compared to the scale of what we need. They've laid out a three-pronged approach to tackle this financing challenge.
3 prongs, okay. What's the first one?
First, they want to help countries raise their own domestic resources for climate action.
So empowering countries to sort of help themselves.
Exactly. It's about creating the right policy environment to encourage those investments in climate-smart solutions.
Give me an example. What kind of policies are we talking about?
Well, one example is carbon pricing.
Making polluting activities more expensive.
Right. When it costs more to pollute, it pushes businesses and individuals to find cleaner, more sustainable options.
And the revenue generated from those carbon pricing schemes can then be funneled back into climate-friendly initiatives. It's like a win-win.
Exactly. And it creates a kind of virtuous cycle. The polluter pays to help clean up the mess.
I like it. All right, what's the second prong in their financing strategy?
The second prong focuses on attracting private capital, Public funds alone simply won't be enough.
Right, because there's a ton of money sitting on the sidelines in the private sector just waiting for the right investment opportunities.
And the World Bank Group sees this transition to a green economy as a massive opportunity.
But how do they convince those private investors to jump on board? Especially when we're talking about investments in developing countries where the risks might seem higher.
They're using a variety of financial instruments to make those investments more attractive. Things like green bonds and guarantees to help mitigate those risks.
Green bonds, okay. Those are becoming pretty popular, right?
They are. And then there's this really interesting thing called blended finance.
Blended finance. What's in that blend?
It's basically a combination of public and private funds.
So the public money is sort of acting as a catalyst.
Exactly. It helps to de-risk the investment and make it more appealing to private investors. It's like a little bit of public money can unlock a lot more private capital.
Okay, I'm following you. So public funds act as a kind of safety net, and that encourages those bigger private investments to flow.
Precisely. And this approach has already seen some success, particularly in the renewable energy sector.
Like that scaling solar program they have, the one helping African countries develop solar energy.
Exactly. They've used guarantees and advisory support to attract billions in private investments for solar projects. Now they're looking to replicate that success in other areas like climate-smart agriculture and sustainable cities.
It sounds like a pretty smart approach. All right, so we've covered boosting domestic resources and mobilizing private capital. What's the third prong of their financing strategy?
The third prong is all about concessional finance.
Okay, break that down for me. Concessional finance, what exactly does that mean?
It basically refers to grants and low-interest loans that are offered to developing countries, often with more flexible repayment terms.
So it's a way to make financing more accessible and affordable for those countries that need it most.
Exactly. And this type of finance is especially crucial for things like adaptation projects.
Because those don't always generate the same kind of financial returns as, say, a big renewable energy project.
You're right. Think about things like building seawalls to protect against rising sea levels or developing drought-resistant crops. These are essential for climate resilience, but they might not be as attractive to private investors looking for a quick profit.
So concessional finance helps to fill that gap, making sure that these critical adaptation projects can still get funded.
Precisely. And the World Bank Group, through its International Development Association, or IDA, is one of the largest providers of this type of finance.
So they're playing a really important role in helping vulnerable countries adapt to climate change.
They are. And they're also working to use these concessional funds to leverage even more private investment, similar to the blended finance approach.
So again, it's about using those public funds strategically to unlock those larger pools of private capital.
Exactly. Now, beyond these three core financing strategies, the plan also highlights the need for financial sector reforms.
Financial sector reforms. That sounds a little bit technical. What does that mean in plain English?
It's all about making sure that financial systems are aligned with climate goals.
So making sure that money is flowing towards solutions, not problems.
Exactly. This could involve things like incorporating climate risk into lending decisions or developing green banking standards.
It's like making sure that the whole system, not just individual projects, is working towards a greener future.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a system where sustainable investments are rewarded and unsustainable ones are penalized.
And that requires changing not just financial regulations, but also the mindsets of banks, investors, and policymakers.
Right. And the plan talks about working with governments to develop things like green taxonomies.
Green taxonomies, that's a new one.
It's basically about creating a common language and standards for what qualifies as a green investment.
Ah, so everyone is on the same page. It helps prevent greenwashing and makes it easier for investors to make informed decisions.
Exactly. Transparency and accountability are key. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about these high-level financial mechanisms.
And it can feel a bit abstract. Like, how does this actually impact the average person?
That's a great question, and it's important to connect the dots. Ultimately, the success of these financing strategies depends on us, on individuals making informed choices.
So what can we do? I mean, beyond just recycling and using less energy.
Well, first of all, staying informed is crucial.
Never underestimate the power of a good podcast.
Exactly. But it's also about making conscious choices with our own finances, choosing to invest in green funds or considering things like green mortgages when buying a house.
So it's about aligning our money with our values.
Precisely. We can all make a difference with the choices we make.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort.
And of course, we can't forget about the power of our voices. We need to hold our leaders and policymakers accountable and demand action on climate change.
Voting for candidates who prioritize climate action, supporting policies that encourage sustainable investments. It all adds up.
It does. It's a combination of individual actions, collective pressure, and smart policies that will create the change we need.
That's inspiring. I love how this plan goes beyond just the dollars and cents. It really empowers people and communities.
It does. It recognizes that tackling climate change isn't just a technological or financial challenge, it's a social and human one.
And that's what we'll be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
And we're back. As we've been talking about this action plan, it's really struck me that it's not just some cold, hard financial document.
No, not at all.
It's actually quite people-focused. There's this emphasis on creating a future that's not just sustainable, but also just and equitable.
Exactly. And at the heart of that is this idea of a just transition.
Yeah, that's a term we hear a lot these days, but what does it really mean in practice?
Well, it starts by acknowledging that the shift away from fossil fuels is going to have a big impact on people.
On workers and communities whose livelihoods depend on those industries.
Exactly. And a just transition is about making sure those people have the support and opportunities they need to thrive in a greener economy.
So it's not just about shutting down coal mines and oil rigs. It's about creating pathways for those workers to find new jobs, maybe in the clean energy sector. Precisely. And the plan recognizes that it's not just about job training programs. It's about investing in education, providing social safety nets, and supporting those communities.
It's about making sure that everyone benefits from this transition to a green economy, not just a select few.
Exactly. And this principle of a just transition is woven throughout the entire plan. For example, when they talk about transforming energy systems.
They emphasize creating jobs in the renewable energy sector.
Right. And they specifically highlight the potential for job growth in developing countries, where there's a huge need for clean energy.
So creating opportunities in the places that are going to be most affected by the shift away from fossil fuels.
That's the idea. And it's not just about energy. This idea of a just transition applies to other areas too, like agriculture.
So how does that play out in the context of climate-smart agriculture,
Well, the plan emphasizes supporting smallholder farmers,
who are often the most vulnerable to climate impacts?
but also play a vital role in feeding their communities and the world. So it's about empowering those farmers with the knowledge and resources they need to adapt.
Not just pushing them aside in favor of big industrial agriculture.
Exactly. And when the plan talks about making cities more resilient,
They talk about making sure those planning processes are inclusive.
right, they want to make sure that all residents, especially those in vulnerable communities, have a voice.
Because we know that climate change often hits the poorest and most marginalized the hardest.
Exactly. And the plan is really trying to make sure that solutions don't just benefit the wealthy or the privileged.
So it's about making sure that everyone has access to things like safe and affordable housing, clean water, reliable transportation.
And green spaces, even as the climate changes. It's about building cities that are not just resilient, but also equitable.
It's about taking that holistic view, recognizing that climate change is connected to a whole web of social and economic issues.
And the plan really gets that. They're looking for solutions that address all these challenges together, not in isolation.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure. When they talk about transforming agriculture, they also emphasize protecting forests and promoting sustainable land management.
Because healthy ecosystems are crucial for everything. For climate mitigation, for adaptation, for the livelihoods of people who depend on those ecosystems.
Right. It's all connected. And even when they talk about financing, they emphasize using those investments to also advance those broader social and economic development goals.
So it's not just about throwing money at climate change. It's about making sure that those investments are also making a positive impact on people's lives.
Exactly. It's about maximizing those benefits, creating jobs, improving livelihoods, reducing inequality. It's about using the challenge of climate change as an opportunity to build a better world.
And that's something we can all get behind.
Definitely. And it's a global effort, right? It requires everyone working together. Governments, businesses, civil society, individuals.
We all have a role to play.
The World Bank Group can help, but ultimately success depends on all of us.
That's a powerful message. It's a reminder that we're all connected and that we all have a responsibility to act.
Absolutely. And We've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, but I want to end on a note of optimism.
Optimism, yes.
This climate change action plan is a really ambitious and forward-looking document. It lays out a path for a future where we can address the climate crisis and create a more just and prosperous world for everyone.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and honestly, I'm feeling pretty inspired to do my part, however small it may be.
That's what we like to hear. That's exactly what this plan calls for. It's a call to action for all of us to come together, be innovative, and work towards that better future.
So, to all our listeners out there, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought. What role can you play in this transformation? What actions, big or small, can you take in your own life, your community, your workplace, to help build that greener, more resilient, more equitable future?
We challenge you to find those answers and join us on this journey. Thanks for diving in with us.